Hey, welcome to The Feast Life, where we empower you, the modern homeschool mom, to create a life and homeschool you love. I'm Julie Ross, the creator of the award-winning curriculum A Gentle Feast, a homeschool veteran of over 20 years, and a certified Christian life coach. Charlotte Mason said, life should be all living, not a mere tedious passing of time. So on this show, we seek to savor the feast of life. So go get your favorite beverage and pull up a chair. You're welcome at this table. So if you're not familiar with me, my name is Julie Ross. I'm the founder of A Gentle Feast, a complete Charlotte Mason curriculum for the entire family. And these are my kiddos. So my oldest is 23. She just graduated with a degree in graphic design. Then my second daughter will be a senior at USC in the fall, and she's studying neuroscience. And then I have a 16, 15, and 13-year-old. So yes, I have lots of teenagers, lots of fun. It has been a wild ride for the past 20 years. I was a former public school teacher and the founder of a private Christian school. And so when I first started homeschooling my kids, I went back with what I already knew, which was traditional schooling. And all my kids had different workbooks for different subjects, and we were all trying to do different things. And plus I had 3 little babies. So I was, needless to say, a little overwhelmed. I was staying up till midnight on Pinterest, trying to print out things that we could do. I was always felt like I was reinventing the wheel. And within 2 years, I was like, this cannot be what homeschooling is. I had this ideal in my head of reading great books and being connected and going on adventures with my kids. But that wasn't what was actually happening in our home. And most days I just felt like I was a drill sergeant trying to get my kids to like do the next thing and get through this and check off these boxes. And so it was at this point that I started diving into Charlotte Mason's philosophy even more and reading through her volumes and trying to figure out, how do you take this beautiful philosophy and actually make it happen in your home on a Monday? And so A Gentle Feast kind of grew out of what I was doing with my own children. I am really excited and passionate about making this philosophy really simple and really practical for families because it has transformed my family's life, and I want everyone to experience the joy of this approach. So let's dive in. So who's Charlotte Mason? I remember when I first started thinking about this, I had a friend and we were talking about it, and she said, Charlotte Mason, I think I've heard of her. Isn't she like one of those hippies who thinks children should just play outside all day? And as you can tell from the picture, Charlotte Mason's not a hippie. She lived in Victorian England, and she was a school teacher. And then she started giving a series of lectures to raise money for her church. It was through these lectures that her philosophy developed. She started a school in Ambleside to train governesses to go into people's homes. So she's the only educational philosophy out there for homeschoolers. Like, she really felt that home was the best place for children to learn. But as her philosophy started spreading, she formed the Parents National Education Union, and families throughout the British Empire started writing to her. Can we get your programs? Can you tell us what books to use? We want to start using this approach in our home. So mothers were actually starting to teach their kids at their houses using her approach. Then schools throughout England started using her philosophy as well. And then in the 1980s, the Andreolas went to England as missionaries, and they discovered Charlotte Mason, and they brought her writings back here and printed them, the original pink volumes. That is thanks to them. And then since the 80s, for the past 40 years, this philosophy has just spread like wildfire amongst homeschoolers here in the United States because it is so powerful and such a beautiful approach to learning. So that kind of gives you a little rundown about who Charlotte Mason is, but let's dive in to what this approach actually is. So I like to start off with a really simple foundation here. So I can tell you the difference between our modern traditional education system and the Charlotte Mason approach. And believe me, there are a lot of differences, but I like to show you. And so I'm going to show you a very simple example, and that has to do with books. The foundation of a Charlotte Mason approach is using what she called living books, real books that are told in a narrative style that capture the child's imagination and attention. And so we're going to do a little history lesson. This is Andrew Jackson, and I'm going to give a traditional kind of history lesson. And then I'm going to show you the Charlotte Mason approach. I'm going to stop my screen for a second so you can just see me for a second. Okay. So let's look at a traditional history lesson. So this is the traditional kind of textbook that you might have had when you were in school. I'm going to read it, but make sure you pay attention because there will be a test. America in the early 1800s was changing fast. In the North, workshops run by the craftspeople who owned them were being replaced by large-scale factories owned by business people and staffed by hired workers. In the South, small family farms began to give way to large cotton plantations owned by wealthy white people and worked by enslaved African Americans. Wealth seemed to be concentrating into fewer hands. Many ordinary Americans felt left behind. Hoping for change, small farmers, frontier settlers, and slaveholders rallied behind Andrew Jackson, the popular hero of the War of 1812 and presidential candidate in the 1824 election. They believed Jackson would defend the rights of the common people and the slave states. They had been bitterly disappointed in the way Jackson had lost the 1824 election because of a decision in the House of Representatives. During the time of Jackson's popularity, a number of democratic reforms were made. Many states changed their qualifications for voters. They lowered or even eliminated the requirement that men own a certain amount of property to vote or hold office. Political parties began holding public nominating conventions where party members chose the party's candidates. Previously, candidates were selected by party leaders. This increase of voting rights by lowering property requirements became later known as Jacksonian democracy. Jackson's supporters were determined that their candidate would win the 1828 election. The Democratic Party arose from these supporters of Jackson. Many people who backed President Adams began calling themselves National Republicans. The 1828 presidential contest was a rematch of the 1824 election. Once again, John Quincy Adams faced Andrew Jackson. Jackson chose Senator John C. Calhoun as his running mate. Jackson's supporters saw his victory as a win for the common people. A crowd cheered outside the Capitol as he took his oath of office. The massive crowd followed Jackson to a huge party on the White House lawn. The few police officers on hand had difficulty controlling the partygoers. As president, Jackson rewarded some of his supporters with government jobs. This spoils system, the practice of giving government jobs to political backers, comes from the saying, "To the victor belongs the spoils." Secretary of State Martin Van Buren was one of Jackson's strongest allies in his official cabinet. President Jackson also relied a great deal on his kitchen cabinet, an informal group of trusted advisors who sometimes met in the White House kitchen. All right, so take out a piece of paper and number from 1 through 5. We're going to have a little test to see if you're paying attention. All right, number 1. President Jackson's group of advisors was known as the blank because of where its members met in the White House. Number 2, blank served as Andrew Jackson's vice president until he resigned due to the dispute over nullification. Number 3, the practice of rewarding supporters with positions in government is known as the blank. And then number 4, the voting rights were expanded by eliminating what requirement? And then number 5, what political party was formed from Jackson's supporters? All right, so let's try now a Charlotte Mason style history lesson. Like I said, Charlotte Mason uses real books, living books, instead of textbooks. And she uses a practice called narration, which I will explain in a second here. So right now, you just imagine you're with your kids. Everybody's, let's get all cozy here. I have a story for you today. We're going to learn about Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is one of the most picturesque characters in American history. He was born of Scotch-Irish parents on the borderline between North and South Carolina. His father died about the time he was born, and his mother had to support her 3 boys by spinning flax. Jackson grew up to be a tall, slender lad with red hair and a freckled face. He was very wild, quick-tempered, and mischievous. He had many quarrels with his companions and many fights, but at home he was devoted to his mother and showed kindness to their horses and other animals on the farm. He was a fearless rider, and all his life he owned fine horses. When Jackson was 14 years of age, the revolution was still in progress. The British Army had swept through the neighborhood of his home, and the boy had seen his relatives and neighbors suffering and dying. The local church was used as a hospital, and Jackson's mother often went there to nurse the sick and wounded. Andrew and his brother Robert ran errands for her and were in and out of the church so often that they soon became familiar with the horrors of war. At one time, Andrew and his brother were taken prisoners by the British and were confined in the house of their own cousin. The English officers had everything they wished, and one of them ordered Jackson to clean his muddy boots. Andrew replied, "I am a prisoner of war, not a slave or a servant. You may clean them yourself." This enraged the British officer to such an extent that he struck at the boy with his sword, wounding him on his head and hand. Jackson carried the scars with him all of his life. Robert also received rough treatment from the brutal officers. The boys were carried 40 miles away to a prison camp and not allowed any food or water. There, smallpox broke out, and both boys were quite sick with it. Their mother secured their release, but Robert, suffering from wounds and fever, died 2 days after he reached home, and Andrew was ill for many weeks. Before he was quite well, his mother also died. During the War of 1812, Jackson did great service as a soldier. He fought in the South and was prominent at the Battle of New Orleans. Once during the campaign, some soldiers grew mutinous because food was scarce, and they threatened to leave. Jackson, with his arm in a sling, rode up to them and, taking his pistol in his free hand, said, "By the Eternal, I will shoot the first man that moves." The soldiers knew he would do it, and there was no further trouble. His endurance during this campaign earned for him the name Old Hickory, because he was so tough and because though he would often bend, he would not break. In appearance, he was tall and erect and sparse, with dark blue eyes and heavy eyebrows. All through his life, his temper was fiery and easily aroused when he was opposed. He became president of the United States when he was past 60 years of age. He was always a plain man of the people who hated his enemies and wanted them punished, and who loved his friends and wanted them rewarded. He was a strong-minded president who had his own way without asking advice, and often it was a very good way. Even to this day, he is regarded as among the notable men who have held this high position. All right, so I'd like you to tell me what the story was about. Obviously, you're not sitting in my office, so you can't do that in person, but you can pause the video. You can use your voice memo on your phone. You could take out a piece of paper. You could write it down. You could find somebody in your house who you want to tell about this. But the key is to tell somebody, either verbally or in writing, what you remember from the story. So take a minute and go do that. And then I'll be right here. Oftentimes, after I'm doing this conference at a homeschool convention, doing this talk at a homeschool convention, I ask people, okay, tell me about your experience. So usually when I say, okay, what was going through your mind as I was reading the textbook? People are like, nothing. I was actually thinking about like where I was going to go for lunch today. I was completely not paying attention. Or I was so stressed out trying to remember like all the words that were being thrown at me that I didn't actually really get a whole lot out of that. Or how did you feel when you were having to answer the questions? A lot of people say I was really anxious. I couldn't remember what the answer was, or I didn't know if I had the right answer. I was second guessing myself. And so they felt a lot of stress or anxiety. And then I asked people, okay, so when I was reading the Andrew Jackson story from a living book, what was going through your head? And a lot of people say, I could picture it. It felt like a movie in my head. And I could see him as this little red freckle boy. A lot of people, I even have sometimes people in the audience who get teary when I'm talking about his brother and his mother dying. You feel like you could put yourself in his shoes. He becomes a real human, which didn't happen in the textbook, did it? We didn't really know anything about him or really even care. And then I asked you to tell me what it was about, either by talking or by writing. And that's what Charlotte Mason calls the process of narration. And she said, we can make it really complicated, but it's really simple. She says, anytime somebody learns something, we have our natural human tendency is we want to go tell someone about it, right? You go read a great book and you want to call your friends, or you go see a great movie, you want to tell people about it. So when we learn something, when we see something that's amazing, we want to go tell. That actually makes it our own. If you can't tell me about the last book you read, you probably weren't paying attention, were you? Or you listened to a sermon at church and someone's, oh, what happened at church today? And you're like, yeah, if you can't tell it back, you don't know it. And so our children can hone into this natural process of being able to talk. It's so amazing because it builds your relationship with your children and has this connection. Our children learn to express themselves and communicate well. And they're not stressed about, did I get the right answer? Did I do the right thing? They're able to make it their own and talk about the things that they thought were important. All right, so let's dive in. Now that you can see the different approach here, I'm going to use the word feast to break down Charlotte Mason's philosophy into like real simple little pillars here. All right. So each of these letters stands for a different pillar of her philosophy. So F is for a full and generous curriculum. Charlotte Mason said, now, the method I'm advocating has this advantage. It multiplies time. Each school period is quadrupled in time value. And we find that we get through a surprising amount of history in a thorough way. In about the same time that in most schools afford no more than a skeleton of English history only. We know that young people are enormously interested in the subject and give concentrated attention if we give them the right books, which goes to show you what I was showing you earlier from the different books, right? We are aware that our own discursive talk is usually a waste of time and a strain on the scholar's attention. So Charlotte Mason uses this metaphor of a feast a lot, which is why I'm using that as the acronym here and why I named my curriculum a Gentle Feast. So here are some of the subjects that she would include for a fifth grader: Bible, hymn study, poetry, picture study, composer study, copywork, dictation, grammar, literature, math and science, British history, French history, natural history, ancient history, Latin, French, and German, folk songs and dances, solfa, drawing, handicrafts, Shakespeare, Plutarch, nature study. What in the world? How are we going to do all this? How are we going to include all these different subjects? When I first started using her philosophy with my family, it was taking forever. I was trying to do all these things every day. At school's 6 o'clock. And I'm like, okay, I know Charlotte Mason says we're supposed to have our afternoons outside. What is happening? I can't do this much school. And then I realized, reading further, again, like I said, I've tried everything here by trial and error, so I'm just going to save you the time, that she doesn't do all those subjects every day. And some of these subjects she only does once a week for 5 minutes. It's like a feast. Like, think of Thanksgiving dinner. You have all these different amazing dishes, right? You're not going to eat the same amount of serving of all of them or you explode, right? So you might just try one piece of that thing or one bite of this. And so that's what this feast is. It's exposing our children to a lot of different beautiful subjects, but we're not overdosing them by giving them huge amounts. The way that she can get through all these different subjects and provide this beautiful feast is she has short lessons and the teacher's not talking the whole entire time, so that they are coming in touch with the book for themselves, like I read you to you from that Andrew Jackson book. And because they're interested, they're excited, it doesn't take 45 minutes for a history lesson. It can get done in 20 because they're actually focused, they're paying attention, they want to know what's going to happen. And that's what happens when you use a living book over a textbook. Sorry, I need some water. So she's able to provide like what you can cover in history. You can go so much deeper when you're not trying to go so wide. So instead of just doing like a skeleton of history, the way that she has her history rotation set up, you can go really deep into one time period. Okay, E is for education is a life. Charlotte Mason said, education is a life, and that life is sustained on ideas. Ideas are of spiritual origin. God has made us so that we get them chiefly as we convey them to one another, whether by word on a written page, like from the book I just read, scripture, music, but we must sustain a child's inner life with ideas as we sustain his body with food. Probably he'll reject 9/10 of the ideas we offer as he makes use of only a small portion of his bodily food, rejecting the rest. He is an eclectic. He may choose this or that. Our business is to supply him with due abundance and variety, and his to take what he needs. Urgency on our part annoys him. He resists forcible feeding and loathes pre-digested food. So children need ideas. This is what their minds need to grow upon, just like their bodies need proper healthy food to grow upon. How do we impart ideas into our children? By reading wonderful books, through scripture, through music. Now, our children might not take in all of these beautiful things that we're offering them all at once. Okay, and that's okay. They're going to take what they need. That's why we have to have such a full feast. Okay, we're not just giving them like little scraps and hoping it's going to be what feeds their mind, little scraps of ideas here and there. We want ideas to be overflowing from all the different subjects that we're teaching all day long. And our children resist forcible feeding and pre-digested food. So think of like a mama bird like digesting the food and then spitting it into the baby bird's mouth. You don't have to learn everything and then teach it to your children. You don't have to make sure you're stuffing it. Here's all the things you need to know today. Get all this stuff in there. When I first understood that part of this philosophy, it was so peaceful. I don't have to be the fountainhead of all knowledge. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we're talking about the role of the teacher, but we're providing this amazing, beautiful feast, and our children are coming to it. Education is a life, it's living. So it grows inside of your children. Okay. We don't have to make sure that we're stuffing it all in there today. It's a life, it's a process. We're always learning and always growing. And because education is a life, it doesn't just happen between the hours of 9 and 2 sitting around your dining room table. Like learning and life happen everywhere. Our children are always learning, growing, connecting ideas, which is such a beautiful part of this approach. A is for a child is born a person. And you're like, what? Come on, lady. I knew you said you were going to be simple, but this is a little too simple. Today's episode is brought to you by A Gentle Feast. A Gentle Feast offers a complete living books curriculum, an award-winning early reading program, and more tools to equip you to apply Charlotte Mason's timeless philosophy into your modern homeschool. Go to agentlefeast.com to check it out. Smooth and easy days are closer than you think. Now, listen, this is Charlotte Mason's first principle. She had 20 principles of her philosophy. She started with that a child is born a person. And it was so revolutionary for her time. So think about when she's writing this. So she's writing in Victorian England where children were supposed to be seen and not heard, where children were just basically like property, right? And she's saying, no, child is born a person. They are born with unlimited potential. They have an amazing mind, which is able to grapple with things that we don't even understand how fast their minds are growing and learning. And because they're a person, they have a soul, and we need to be the one helping to nourish and grow that as well. Education isn't just what you're learning from your books. It's not just growing your mind. We have to look at a child as a whole, complete person. Is what we're doing in our homeschool, nurturing them, body, mind, soul, spirit, all of them. She says, if we have not proven that a child is a person with a mind as complete and as beautiful as his beautiful little body, we can at least show that he always has all the mind he requires for his occasions. That is, that his mind is the instrument of his education, and that his education does not produce his mind. We're not filling up an empty bucket. We are nurturing and growing something that's already there. So think of like a seed, right? A seed has all of its life potential inside of it. But that life potential isn't going to come out of that seed unless it's properly taken care of with dirt, water, air, all that stuff. So our job is to take this beautiful mind that God has given our children and to properly nourish it, care for it, allow it space and room and freedom to grow at its own time and in its own pace. And that's what's so beautiful about Charlotte Mason's approach, because she valued children so much. Now, our culture can swing a little bit the other pendulum way and value children too much. And that's not what she's talking about here. She's talking about they have all that they need inside of them. And our job is to grow and to nourish that. But we also need to help control some of their natural human tendencies as well, right? And to grow them and help mold the character that's already inside of them. So she says, our real concern is that children should have a good and regular supply of mind stuff to think upon, that they should have large converse with books as well as things, that they should become intimate with great men through the books and works of art they have left us, the best part of themselves. Thought breeds thought. Children familiar with great thoughts take as naturally to thinking for themselves as the well-nourished body takes to growing. We must bear in mind that growth, intellectual, moral, spiritual, is the sole end of education. Children are not, in fact, slaves of other people's opinions, but do their fair share of thinking, which is their due service to the state. So let me break this down for you. I love this part that I put in bold. What is the purpose of education? Why are we homeschooling in the first place here, people? We want to grow our children as humans, not just what they know, but their moral and their spiritual personhood as well. Because a child is a person, because education is living, thought breeds thought. Education is the science of relations, Charlotte Mason put it that way. Our kids are constantly making connections between what they're reading here and what they're learning in this subject. We went out on a nature walk about a year after we read that story about Andrew Jackson, and we're walking through the woods, and my son goes, "Mom, look, Andrew Jackson's behind you." I was like, "Okay, you've lost it, boy." And I look, and guess what's behind me? A hickory tree. He made that connection months later. But that idea, that seed in his mind about Andrew Jackson's nickname being Old Hickory, that seed was there. And then when he saw a hickory tree, that synapse connected and it made that connection in his brain even stronger, which is so beautiful and so amazing, this process. But we get in the way and we think that we need to be the ones making all the connections for our kids. And we're like, okay, today we're going to learn about this. And this relates to this subject. And then I'm going to do this whole thing on oceans. And we're going to read books about oceans. We're going to do science experience about oceans and math things about oceans. And we are the ones doing all these connected, and we take the joy out of that connection for our children. And they need to be the ones making that for themselves, which sometimes means us getting out of the way. Because S stands for self-education. This is the work of a child. Now, sometimes people get the myth that Charlotte Mason education is child-led, meaning children just get to decide what they want to learn every day. And that is definitely not the case. She had a very clear and set program of what children should be learning. But they're doing the work of self-education, meaning they are going to come to the book. They're going to come to the nature. They're going to come to the piece of art. And they're going to have to chew on the ideas that are in that resource. So she says the children, not the teachers, are the responsible persons. They do the work by self-effort, because really, there's no education but self-education. Yes, we learn so much from other people, right? I'm sure, hopefully you're learning something right now from listening to me, I hope. But really, when you can go and you can read a book or you can study something for yourself and make it your own, that is the most powerful way that we learn as humans. And Charlotte Mason capitalized on this. So you don't have to take in all the information like the mama bird and figure out what you're going to do with it and how you're going to package it and how you're going to entertain your kids with it and then pour it into them. No, you can allow them, because they are persons, because they have this amazing, beautiful mind, to come to the resources for themselves. We'll get to the teacher in a minute, what you're doing. But students are doing this hard work. Whatever a child or grown-up person can tell, that we may be sure he knows. And what he cannot tell, he doesn't know. So that's narration. A child's work is, you're going to read a living book to them, or they're going to read it for themselves, and then they're going to tell back, whether that's in talking when they're really young, or if it's in written form as they get older and they start making deeper connections and can write even more, because that is the work of self-education, making something for your own and being able to tell it to someone else. Now, what does the teacher do? Okay, your job is so important. Okay, this isn't like laissez-faire, do what you want, learn what you want, read what you want, do whatever. Homeschooling, that's not this approach, okay? Your very important job is to prepare the feast, but then let the child savor the food as they will. So how do you prepare the feast? What are you doing? This is what Charlotte Mason said you need to do. Give children a wide range of subjects with the end in view of establishing in each case some one or more of the relations I have indicated. Let them learn from firsthand sources of information. Really good books, the best going on the subject they're engaged upon. Let them get at the books themselves. Do not let them be flooded with a warm dilute at the lips of their teacher. You don't need to give them a whole lecture on whatever it is. The teacher's business is to indicate, stimulate, direct, and constrain the acquirement of knowledge, but by no means to be the fountainhead and source of all knowledge in his or own person. Can you take a deep breath there? What a relief, right? Our job, we're indicating, okay, you're going to be doing this. You're going to be reading this. You have 20 minutes. We're stimulating. Oh, I wonder what's going to happen next in our story about George Washington today. We're going to direct and constrain. We're going to try to keep their attention to the task at hand. That is all very important. Okay, picking really great books, finding the best books for each subject. That is your job in preparing the feast. But you don't need to be the one, like I said, pouring out all the information into your child. They're doing that self-education work, which is so freeing as a homeschool teacher and allowing that. It's a beautiful allowing of learning. It brings the joy. Honestly, for me, it brought the joy back to homeschool. It took the pressure off so that I could just learn alongside my kids. And that's what I've been doing. Honestly, this approach, I think it's so amazing because it changed me as a person. I now pull over on the side of the road because I'm like, oh my goodness, look at this bird, kids. We all got to look at this. I never would have done that. I didn't even notice the flowers, the birds, the things that were around me all the time. And now I can hear a piece of music and go, oh, that's so and so. Oh, that reminds me of this thing we read about in this book. And I'm building the science of relations. I'm building all these connections for myself. And I know if it can change me at this age, it's definitely going to be changing my kids with their growing brains and all the things that they're learning as well. Okay, when I used to give this talk, I would always get asked at the end, okay, this sounds really beautiful and lovely, but does this actually work? Like, how many kids who have gone through Charlotte Mason's approach, go to college, what kind of jobs did they get, what are their SAT scores, all that stuff, okay? I just started including this in the talk. So does this actually work? Charlotte Mason says, the question is not, how much does the youth know when he has finished his education, but how much does he care? And about how many orders of things does he care? In fact, how large is the room in which he finds his feet set? And therefore, how full is the life he has before him? A lot of people finish our modern education system and they don't care. Or they go to a four-year college that's a bunch of busy work and they're completely burnt out. They're not inspired. So what really makes a difference? It's how big is this room? How many things have they learned about and got to experience? I want my children to have this full life that's going to shape them as a complete person. And what's so fascinating is that Google came out with a study called Project Oxygen to study the top skills that their top employees had. And here's what the results were. Project Oxygen shocked everyone by concluding that among the 8 most important qualities of Google's top employees, STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, mathematics, expertise came in dead last. The 7 top characteristics of success at Google are all soft skills: being a good coach, communicating and listening well, processing insight into others and understanding different points of view, having empathy towards and being supportive of one's colleagues, being a good critical thinker and problem solver, and being able to make connections amongst complex ideas. When I read that, I was like, oh my goodness, those are all the things you get from a Charlotte Mason education. Communicating and listening well, right? You get that by narrating, by talking about your ideas, by putting them in a logical fashion and being able to communicate them with somebody. You get insight into other people's point of view and have empathy towards them by reading stories like the ones I read to you about Andrew Jackson, right? You could put yourself in his shoes and be like, oh my gosh, that would have been horrible to lose my mom and my brother and have the soldier telling me what to do. You don't get that from a textbook with a bunch of facts. They're able to think critically and be problem solvers because they're doing that hard work of education for themselves. Okay, what's important from this? What's not important? How can I put this in sequential order when they're narrating? And then being able to make connections amongst complex ideas. That's what I told you. Education is the science of relations. When we get out of the way and we let students make these connections for themselves, it actually makes the learning even more rooted in their brain in those neural pathways. But it helps them later on in life be able to make connections amongst complex ideas, which Google is saying is one of their top rated skills for their employees. Also, a recent survey of 260 employers by the nonprofit National Associations of Colleges and Employers, which includes both small firms and little ones, and some like Chevron and IBM, ranked communication skills in its top 3 most sought after qualities by job recruiters. STEM skills are vital to the world we live in today, but technology alone, as Steve Jobs famously insisted, is not enough. We desperately need the expertise of those who are educated to be human. We are raising humans. We're not just filling buckets here. And that is why a Charlotte Mason approach is so powerful. So if you want to learn more, the 2 books I recommend for everybody getting started on this philosophy: For the Children's Sake, and a Charlotte Mason companion. You could also listen to my podcast on YouTube, The Feast Life. Talk a lot about Charlotte Mason's philosophy and approach. You could also dive into reading her original writings. So if you're new and you're just wanting to dip your toes into this, I have a few simple little things that you can try. So first of all, nature study. So Charlotte Mason had short lessons. They were done by lunch so that they could go outside and explore. So there's a million resources out there. Find something. It's summer. It's a perfect opportunity to go, depending on where you're living, what's growing, what do you see, what birds, what nature. Just go out in nature. Don't make it too complicated. Short lessons. So how can you take what you're already doing and instead of trying to do a 45-minute grammar lesson, make it a 10-minute grammar lesson and see how much more effective it is when your child is focusing for 10 minutes instead of trying to focus for 45 minutes. Because y'all, like the adult attention span now is less than a goldfish. But we're expecting our students to, little kids, to pay attention for 45 minutes to a grammar lesson. That's just not realistic, people. So start to shorten the lessons you're already doing. You can try morning time is a great place to start. I'll mention a resource here in a second. But basically, morning time is a time to come together as a family to look at beautiful art, listen to beautiful music, read beautiful poetry, get your minds and hearts prepared for the day. Only takes a few minutes, and there's a million resources out there for that as well. And try to read one living book and then have your children narrate, tell you what it was about. Summer's a great time to do that. Just book a read aloud that you could read when it's really hot outside, come in the afternoon, and then start to read them chapters of these stories or these books that are told in a narrative fashion and ask them to narrate. These are all 4 simple, little easy ways you can start to see if this approach might be a good fit for you. If you're interested in morning time, I have a free morning time packet. So it has 4 weeks of morning time lessons, like I said, about art, music, poetry, scripture that you can use to see if this works for you. So it's completely free. You can just scan that and get that download as well. It's called Times of Togetherness. So it really is a great way to start building that connection and relationship with your children if that's something that's not been a part of your homeschool. All right, I would love to connect with you. You can find out more about A Gentle Feast on our website. We also have a free Facebook group, and you can follow us on Instagram or listen to our podcast. So thank you all for listening today. I really appreciate it. All right, let's recap today's episode. If you're starting out on this Charlotte Mason path, keep these few principles in mind. 1, you want to offer your child a full and generous curriculum. This includes a broad range of subjects, including art, music, nature study, history, and more. Number 2, education is a life. That means that education is sustained by rich, engaging ideas. Your children get those through real, living books. And number 3, a child is born a person. That means a child is capable of deep thinking and understanding. We want to nurture and grow that life that is already inside of them. Number 4, self-education. We want to encourage our children to be responsible for their own learning by putting them in touch with real books, by putting them in touch with real things out in nature and letting them do the hard work of self-education through the process of narration and telling us back what they learned. And then lastly, the role of the teacher. The role of the teacher is to prepare an educational feast and be a guide, philosopher, and friend to their student. I hope this episode was helpful in getting you started on the Charlotte Mason path. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, please heart it down below and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment and let me know what you learned in today's episode. I'd love to hear from you.